Netanyahu's biggest rival is not Hamas, it's probably elections. And that's where Europe is heading, towards a continent-wide general election. It happens every 5 years. This one is scheduled for early next month. Citizens of the European Union will vote for MEPs. That's members of European Parliament, MEPs. And these MEPs are very powerful. They approve the EU budget, they debate new policies, and they elect the EU Commission President. So there is a lot at stake. Now, every election has some burning issues like inflation or jobs. But in the EU Parliament, it's more ideological. You have different political camps, the far right, the centrists, the socialists, the moderates, and so on. Polls say that the far right could make significant gains this time. So EU President Ursula von der Leyen is firefighting. She's calling the far right Putin's proxies.
When I see what your AfD colleagues, the lead candidates, have done, they are under investigation for being in the pocket of Putin. And if you look at the electoral program, you will see that it echoes the lies and the propaganda of the Kremlin. So clean up your house before you criticize us.
Two factors to note here. One, Putin looms large over these elections. His war in Ukraine is a key campaign issue, and there's a reason why. Traditionally, the EU has been controlled by two groups, the centrists and the socialists, and they oppose Putin's war in Ukraine. They also advocate more aid for Kiev. So the current EU policy was designed by them. But the far right says, forget that. Taking on Putin is costing Europe, energy prices are higher, inflation is higher, and money is being burnt on military aid. So the far right says, reduce support for Ukraine. Maybe even reset things with Putin. Hence von der Leyen's criticism. Which brings us to the second factor. The far right is making inroads. These parties are expected to finish first in 9 EU nations, including in France, Austria, and Poland. They could also finish second or third in 9 countries. So the dynamics are clearly changing. By June, the EU Parliament could look very different. Centrists and socialists out, a right-wing coalition in. And Putin knows that. He's tightening the screws on European companies. Many of them have subsidiaries in Russia, so Moscow is taking them over. 2 such instances have been reported. One by an Italian water heating company and the second by a German appliance maker. Both of them had local wings in Russia. But last week, Vladimir Putin signed an executive order. He put both these subsidiaries under Russian control. Now, Germany and Italy have protested this. They say Russia's move is illegal. But frankly, we've moved past that. Europe has frozen Russian assets parked abroad. So Moscow says this is just retaliation. You freeze our assets, we take over yours. And where does that leave Europe? In a bit of a spot. If anti-Ukraine parties come to power, it could be game over. We've seen indications of that. Last year, Slovakia elected a new government. A right-wing populist became the prime minister there, and he ended military aid to Ukraine. Imagine this happening across Europe. It could cripple Ukraine's war effort, which is why European centrists are worried. We saw that desperation last week. When French President Emmanuel Macron gave an alarmist speech, he warned that Europe could die. But von der Leyen is choosing a different path. She can't work with the far right, but she's looking at less radical options, like Giorgia Meloni of Italy. She leads a right-wing party, but she also supports Ukraine. Meloni is part of a coalition in the EU. It's called the ECR, the European Conservatives and Reformists. And von der Leyen was asked if she would work with the ECR. Listen to her response.
The question was, are you open to cooperation with ECR in the next mandate?
It depends very much on how the composition of the parliament is and who is in what group.
So she's open to it. But either way, one thing is clear. This is going to be a very consequential election for Ukraine, for Putin, and for the future of Europe. The idea of EU was to build unity and consensus. Will that idea survive if EU skeptics control Brussels? We'll find out next month.